Good morning and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you, Peter. My name is Tom Moore and I am a member of the conference committee. This morning, I will be hosting the keynote presentation. Now, if you have any technical issues, please check your confirmation email, which has been sent to you recently. And you'll see that that's in there. That means it will help you through any troubleshooting things that you might have. Or also, if you need to get in contact with anyone to try and help you get through those technical difficulties, you can do that by once again checking your confirmation email. So let's begin. This is room 5, and our keynote for today is none other than Tony Vallance. Now, Tony believes that ownership and agencies are the key to learning, and that is why he involves his students in leadership roles in creating, reviewing, and implementing initiatives and curriculum. Tony's passion is to motivate, engage, and empower students so that they can apply their skills and confidence to any situation that life throws at them. Tony was the winner of the Teacher of the Year at the Australian Education Awards in 2019 and finalist for Outstanding Secondary Teacher of the Year, Victorian Excellence in Education Awards in 2018. In saying that, before we do actually go any further, you can see now that I've got on my screen a picture of me and what you're probably looking at right now. You'll see that there is a chat function just down here. Please, if you've got any questions if you want to comment about anything from the chat, put that in there. But if you do have a question for Tony throughout the presentation, just click on this button here and ask the question, because what happens when you put a question in the chat is it goes through and we lose a bit of, it's hard to keep track of those questions. So if you do have a question, put it in the chat. But in saying that, I would now like to hand over to Tony Vallance. Take it away.
And we are live. Let's begin. Welcome to this keynote presentation called Agents of Change. Gonna learn about how to build on the things that the children have built, so their confidence and their efficacy and their overall agency. So thank you for joining me this morning. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Agents of Change, brought to you by me. I'm Tony. Lovely to meet you guys, and thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to be hanging out with you for the next hour or so. And as the wonderful Tom Moore said, you guys can put through any questions there on Delegate Connect and ask away. And at the end, we'll be doing an awesome little Q&A session. But before we officially kick off, let's be real. 2020 has been a really massive year. And I think if we were to break it down into a mathematical question that might pop up in a kid's textbook, you would see something like this. By the way, just to give Tom extra challenge, if you do have an answer to this question, please post it in the chat. So it's been a massive year. We've had huge ups, huge downs, but we have throughout had some victories as well. And it's been really about gauging the pulse of what's going on with our students, how they've dealt with these massive changes brought about by the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. And so one of those sources, and this is a recent survey, I would do these check-ins at the start of every lesson with my students. And this is the sort of data I was getting. And in particular, this purple band here was getting larger and larger within that pie chart throughout, as we got closer to fortunately coming back to on-site learning. So we were finding a lot of these students were just getting flatter and flatter and flatter. So their window of tolerance to everything that they were facing in their lives was getting narrower and narrower and narrower. But as we know, it's not all negative. And this is really all about how kids who have basically found ways to be more have more agency, have more control over what they're doing, and really understanding how powerful they can be as self-actualized learners. It's finding ways to keep that growth happening and hopefully bring more of our kids, more of our students on board, right? So it's really important that we notice that. I've seen in a lot of schools that I deal with, there has been almost like a putting on an old jumper kind of, let's go back to the status quo approach. Quick, we've got to get back, we've got to get the data. Now, we understand that when it comes to our numeracy data, our literacy data, and so on, yes, these are parts of our systems, but we really can't forget that it's an incredible opportunity to build on some of the positive change that has occurred as a result of this. Now, I've got a groovy little definition here for you, because if we're talking about student agency, we really need to nail it down first, right? And for me, this is the best definition, or as it is correctly pronounced, definition that I have found, which is it's our capacity and propensity to take purposeful initiative, right? It's the opposite of helplessness, and all that spins off from it, learned helplessness and so on. So kids with high levels of agency, or young men and women, do not respond passively to their circumstances. I love that. Do not respond passively to their circumstances. So the forces outside of their control, they are going to exercise control within what they can. And they seek meaning and act with purpose to achieve conditions they desire in their own. And here's the kicker, and it's a massive part of what I'm about, others' lives. And we're talking about the ability to empathize, the first part of the design thinking process, which we're going to get into today, talking about how project-based learning and these foundations and structures can really help grow that student agency. All right. So how can we do this? Well, let's dive in. First of all, I'd like to thank Tom for that beautiful intro. One thing he may have missed out, and this is really important. Well, we know that I'm a teacher. I'm a husband of an amazing wife who is my co-partner in crime for Building Better Brains Australia. And she is a clinical play therapist and brings immense creativity and empowerment to all of her clients. I'm a father of two beautiful boys, 10 and 7. And yeah, a really big part, and this is what Tom was talking about in the intro of what I'm about, is Maslow's hierarchy before Bloom's taxonomy. And sort of unpacking that, what that means is it's really important that we consider what are the things that we can do to ensure safety and regularity for our students. Can we provide that place where they can take risks? And of course, that's what we want as teachers. We want our students to feel confident enough and supported enough to be able to take risks, to fail often, and to push further ahead and learn. Also, in other irrelevant news, having recently turned 41, my late onset early midlife crisis yielded this, as opposed to a Harley Davidson or like a convertible. So got my little electric skateboard and life is good. Also, you may tell from my accent that slips from time to time. I'm originally from New Zealand and came over here way back in 2002. So I consider myself entirely Antipodean nowadays. And so this symbol here, I think really, I feel really resonates with me and represents who I am as a person. And as Tom mentioned, I was lucky enough last year to be chosen as Teacher of the Year at the Australian Education Awards. And most of that really is about my passion and the subsequent results and outcomes from creating these student-centered learning spaces and the subsequent curriculum that I've co-created with students where they can really take ownership of their learning and push forwards. All right, here we go. So project-based learning, PBL, problem-based learning, phenomenon-based learning, or phenomenon-based learning. There's so many different acronyms. Yay, it's the education industry. We love us some acronyms. But really what it is creating engaging real-world and personally meaningful projects that the students can work through, perhaps in differentiated roles, to achieve some kind of an outcome, usually with a communications-based task. And that's where they really unpack and they deconstruct and reconstruct their learning, taking it to that level where they can teach others about a concept or some kind of creation, some kind of prototype, whatever it happens to be. So it is hands-on by nature, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need access to like a STEM or a STEAM facility. It certainly does not. And I guess as a bit of a preface, when it comes to talking about technology, and we will dive down the technology rabbit hole some, when we talk about this, there's so much you can do with cardboard and crayons. There's so much you can do with just getting out on the oval with your students to help kind of invigorate them and empower them. And if you structure it right, you will be so surprised at how far ahead your students can run and how little they need you. If you, like me, have felt over the years sometimes that you're a mama bird in a nest and the little baby birds are just going cheep, 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 all around you, then that's, that feeling of, oh, how do I spell this? How do I do this? You're just getting torn apart by the needs of your students. Then engaging in these kind of processes with your students, you will start to hear a lot less of that cheep, 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 because these students are starting to realize how much they can solve their own problems, how far ahead they can push, how collaborative they can be when it comes to solving a problem without needing to directly go to you as the teacher. So you'll start to go, oh, there's less baby birds in the nest. Oh, I can stretch my wings out a bit. How good. There's amazing stuff you can do there. You'll really start to notice it once you implement these practices. Okay, a bit of a breakdown of our traditional PBL work. So a traditional project-based learning, if we look at it this way. So on the left here, we've got, I am the beholder of all, I am the holder of all knowledge. It's I know all the answers, bam, bam, spam it out. And it's very much, it's all on me, right? So I am the linchpin of what's going on here. I give directions to my students. They follow my directions. My students learn those facts by following the directions. Students present facts, regurgitate, if you will. And then we rinse, wash, and we repeat. In mathematical terms, it could be running a class, and I'd like you to do the left column, odd numbers only, right column, even numbers. And it can become a little bit, that trap whereby they are so used to being, you are the initiator, the one that has those expectations. And by the way, you're not compromising expectations by engaging in these strategies, but I'm just talking about from a traditional perspective. And then the students complete the work, they follow the instructions, and away you go. And then we get to a point where the world outside is screaming for our super skills. They want creativity. They want people who can think outside the box and be courageous with their critical thinking, problem solving, communication skills. But we've trained them to do this. So it's no surprise that sometimes we're frustrated teaching, say, our VCE students, whereby we go, oh, they just couldn't, take the initiative. They couldn't add a bit more. They couldn't unpack what was happening here and push further. Well, we haven't allowed them to build that skill set enough, in my opinion. And so if we go over here, teacher asks a question, okay? Then they start to figure out directions. They start to work collaboratively on solutions. And then they start to expand, their skill set and their knowledge around this real world problem. And there's a key here, I'll get into it shortly, about why we do these real world relevant contextual units. And then they come back. Now, in a perfect world, I'd rather that we actually got rid of this, because in a perfect world, we want to be the ones who enable them to ask their own questions. Why? Because it's all about their agency. We have to let them fly outside of the nest. We have to provide a safe enough nest for them so that they can, that's the only bird impression I can do. Apologies. So that they can fly, maybe hit a few branches on the way down before they get to a point where they believe in themselves and they're supported by their brothers and sisters, and they can leave the nest and fly and ask their own questions. Those are life skills that they are going to need. Very, very important. Ultimately, our job as teachers is to work ourselves out of a job, right? Surely. I'm always talking to my kids about they need to realize how much they don't need me but I have to be careful with how I say that. It has to be done in a supportive way. Okay, now this next diagram is a little bit complicated. There's a lot of short form versions of it, but I just wanted to give you guys a bit of an overview as to the overall process. So there's a few different versions of it, but the real key is this, right? The empathy, the emotive hooks, and relevant real context. I'll give you an example. I co-developed a unit with some students a couple of years back about where I was from in Christchurch, New Zealand, and it was based on the 2011 earthquakes that happened. And we were using, we had digital technologies curriculum elements to hit. We also had to go through and mix it with humanities elements from the curriculum. And then there were some communication elements involving public speaking from the English curriculum. And it was all about creating a rescue robot to go in to the rubble, find signs of life, come back to the user and signal them that they have found somebody. So it was very hands-on, very practical. The students did a lot of research. They had a lot of empathy at the start. I guess I kind of sped up the empathy process because I went back several days after the big earthquake to help my dad move out of his house. And, you know, I was emotional when I was communicating it with the students. It was a pretty traumatic time for you know, members of my family back then, and, you know, sharing what it was like. And then we started to go into the problem solving, and we started to looking at what are we going to do, researching it, looking at the tools that we had, going through our design and development phases, going through our process of iteration in the case of the programming. Other members of the group were looking at how they're going to present this robot as a rescue robot prototype. And then finally, you're coming to this part here, to that communication part, which is really, really important. I think a lot of STEM projects tend to miss this out. And so it's really important because as a super skill of the future, yes, I know in a lot of schools of thought they're called soft skills, but in my vernacular, that's a swear word. They are absolutely super skills. And so basically, this is super important when it comes to peer evaluation, when it comes to students engaging with this and getting the courage to stand up and communicate with their groups. All right, so what can it look like? Well, let's have a little nosy here. So we've got one of our students here, and he was the team leader of this project, and we were doing a unit on organ systems in Year 8 science. Now, the students took a diagram, which you'll see in a second on the projector above, and they took a diagram of the human heart. They worked out what ratio conversion they'd have to apply to create a larger scale version on the butcher paper. The student there was involved in organizing the teams and splitting them into their different roles. And if you notice, as they go into the right side of the heart, those red blood cells come back deoxygenated, and as they go into basically heading off towards the lungs, they actually become oxygenated, and they programmed them to go red, which was so cool. So the level of detail was beyond my expectation for this particular task. What I saw from a personal level as a teacher was that this student here, who had really high levels of anxiety, came from a particularly challenging home life, and he subsequently, and the effect lasted for a couple of months, probably to the end of the year. Now he's a senior student, he still engages with me regularly, and anyway, I noticed that there was much more eye contact going on. There was much more communication with his friends because he had been allowed to fly outside of the nest. So look, let's break it down, right? Cool story, Tony, but how does that fit into the curriculum? That is a wonderful question. So basically what we did afterwards was we dived into the whiteboard tables. If you don't have them, you don't need them. You can dive back into your butcher paper or with chalk outside on a nice day, you know, on the tiger turf, well, not the tiger turf, but somewhere concrete. And they were looking at heart rate versus blood volume. How long would it take to fill up a bath there? We were incorporating digital technologies curriculum, as mentioned, with our use of programming, both in block code and HTML. And then obviously it linked perfectly to our organ systems unit. We had conversations about fathers, grandfathers, uncles in particular. There were some nanas as well, who had issues with their hearts. And so we were talking about, oh, what is a stent and where would that go? This is the whole applying the real world learning to what we're doing with our kids. Super, super critical, because you're creating an emotive hook, which we're going to touch on very shortly. Some other examples are we've done units with humanities and looking at the plague in particular. This was a gamified unit. So basically using this, the students were, I believe this student here was the mayor of the town. And what he had to do was govern his citizens and make sure that they followed the right steps in order to get data from the rest of the village, find out where this plague had originated, look at distances, look at vectors, look at rates of infection. So there were mathematical elements built into this humanities unit. And it's very much, it reminds me, because I've got two young boys, it reminds me of the whole, yeah, come and have your chocolate smoothie. It's delicious. Warning, chocolate smoothie may contain traces of spinach, kale, a whole lot of things like that, that you're going to mash into it. And the students, when you, particularly in high school, are less siloed in your approach, the students just tend to take it in their stride. It's all part of the scenario. It's all part of the unit that they need to, figure out how to learn these things as a part of. It's all, wrapped into that same smoothie, I guess. This is one we did here for Zoos Victoria. So it was a really awesome outreach. And there were a couple of students there that had extremely high absenteeism. And they fed back that when they were working on this unit, and it was a unit of fairly high complexity in terms of the products they delivered at the end and presented Shark Tank scenario to staff from Zoos Victoria. So the skill curve became quite high. They produced a lot of work, had high outcomes, and fed back that they were coming back to school because they really loved working with their team on this project, because they loved animals. And that was a big part of engaging their limbic system, right? Now, this is key. We often in education talk about, the surface. We talk about the external. We talk about student behavior as if it's, not intrinsically linked to whatever's going on for that student and their nervous system at the time. So this is critical, right? It is so, so important that we understand a little bit of basics about the limbic system. Now, in the time we've got today, we can't dive into it too deeply, but here's a brain I prepared earlier. Now, this particular brain, I'm just going to split it in half. We're going to have a look at the inside of it. Now, particularly in adolescence, late teens, late primary school, early adolescence, the limbic system, the emotional cortex in here is extremely active. Now, the evidence shows that if we can engage them emotively, right? So get them emotionally engaged in what is going on with their learning, whether it's giving them a chance to do something completely different, getting them out of the textbook, away from the computer, something that is going to get their body moving, something that is going to get them communicating and working on their social engagement system with their peers, then they are going to have significantly higher retention rates and actually perform much better when it comes to assessment down the track. Now, I know that's a little bit of idealism town because, Tony, we've got curriculum points that we've got to get through and we've got to keep steamrolling. That's true. But it's also true that you don't have to cover every single point on the curriculum. At no point in no curriculum, national or state or in Australia, does it say you have to hit every single point. It's all to be contextualized within your school community, in its context, geographically, culturally, and so on. So you don't have to hit every point, and you can cherry pick from different learning areas and create these units. And there's no better time to do it because it's the last few weeks of 2020. And if there was ever a time to start working on these units, to promote more engagement from the students, to promote more, to allow them to have more ownership of what's going on, then now is the time for that. So getting kids in their fields is massively important, right? Because if you allow that in creating learning for these students, this is the sort of thing that happens. So one of my female students a couple of years back, very, very quiet, very disengaged, high absenteeism again. She was talking about her brother who has various physical and mental handicaps. So he has a lot of challenges, her brother. That subsequently means that, that eats up a lot of time from her mum taking care, because she's a single mum, and there's a lot going on there. Well, we started to create a prototype. Well, by we I mean her and her fellow students. So there were two of them working on it, and they created a prototype that would help her brother go around the zoo and be able to see what was going on. Because one of the issues when he travels around in his electric wheelchair is that he can't see over the top of people's shoulders and heads and see what's going on when he's out and about. And so they created this device. The mock-up there, as you can see, is made with good old Lego Mindstorms. But basically you have a little telescopic GoPro mount, or you have a little high-def camera that would feed to, they ran out of time, but basically they were going to have a little screen on an iPad or some kind of a tablet device, so that her brother could actually have access to that. Now, she was showing up a lot more for class. She was talking about her brother much more. And because she was emotionally engaged in what was going on, her output was significantly higher. I hadn't seen her work that hard before. It is absolute key that we engage the limbic systems, the emotional cortex of our students. Absolutely crucial. And we do so by giving them control. So this is an example of a future hospitals unit, and some of the students who were doing it. What really surprised me was they started to create a narrative. Now, I hadn't created a narrative for this unit outside of create a hospital and, go through the scenario, program your robot to go between, rooms that you create for this floor plan. All of a sudden, they created stories, and they were writing the stories and discussing the stories and modifying the stories. And that was a big moment for me, realizing the power of narrative as you go through these units. And so I understood, I went, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And so what happened was these students went through and said, they gave names to the patients in the rooms. They actually came up with the particular symptoms of the ailments that these patients had. And when we unpacked it further, these ailments related to things they knew about. It was directly related to their lived experience, which again, what was going on inside their brains, had I held up a portable MRI scanner, no. Their emotional cortex is active, and they are remembering a lot, they're researching, and they're creating a relevant narrative based on this particular scenario. So there was a lot of ownership there. So much so that some of these students were coming back at lunch times because they wanted to make it more complex. They wanted to increase the complexity of the programming, and they wanted to add more detail to the actual narrative itself. So because you're allowing them that opportunity to do so, it can really yield phenomenal results with the students going through it. Okay, so let me just pop to the next slide. So some of the tools, and this is what I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about certain technologies that we can use. So virtual reality is an interesting one. You get the wow factor, and it is an absolute short circuit for engaging the limbic system, right? It provides incredible spatial control and immersion using VR. From a primary school level, you don't want to do what's called 6 degree of freedom or 6th VR, which is what these students are doing here. But you will probably be doing something like Google Cardboard, Classroom VR, something like that, where students can hold up a unit to their face, have a bit of a look around, like being inside a 360 degree wraparound photo. And that's sort of the level that they'll experience it. The recommended age from 12 and up is you can do this 6th more free roaming VR. I've found it extremely useful in helping students, solidify their understanding of concepts. I've done it with VCE biology students, but I've seen it done with mathematics as well. And so you could have a bunch of calculations written in the air, kind of Tony Stark Minority Report style, that the students can do. And then they have to go through and demonstrate how these concepts or how these particular mathematical techniques relate to each other. Perhaps starting off with something like a formula triangle and looking at those relationships between how you go through and process those particular equations. So it's really, really interesting. One of the students fed back, he was only in there like 10 minutes, and he popped out and went, I think I get it now. This was for we were doing evolutionary theory in VCE biology. He's like, oh, that makes so much more sense. I've learned more in 10 minutes than I have all term. And I was like, thank you. But also, that's really amazing, because often as we go into the upper echelons of, in particular, secondary school education, the amount of things that the students need to learn as we go through our key learnings, and then our area study 3 investigations, and just really there is a lot there. It's very easy for the students to miss the links. And if there's technology you can use to help show the students, or at least enable them to show themselves, the links between concepts, that's absolutely huge, because that's going to pay off in the exam when something might be related in sequence, or it could be a long form answer where they have to apply multiple concepts. Okay, so a little bit more about this technology. AR, or augmented reality, is essentially projected onto some kind of a screen. So it's like, well, it's a digital projection viewed on a screen. So there's lots of different ways we can have students engage with augmented reality when we're going through various units. And again, this is the problem. It's a great gimmick, but it's actually not that hard to build, deep, real, relevant learning using technologies like this. I think one of the disadvantages of VR and AR and this sort of technology is that often it's perceived as, it's just a toy. They are phenomenal learning tools. And when it comes to teaching these with kids, you do not have to go back to our original kind of process in learning where the teacher knows everything. That is not who you need to be when it comes to engaging with this. You know some of the basics, you flaunt your failures and are vulnerable with the students, as so many of us are with our kids. And we go, well, how could you do this? Hey guys, this has happened. How can we fix this? And you engage them in the process of problem solving with you. When you do that, that puts you on more of a facilitator standpoint anyway, as opposed to the sage on the stage. This is really about when we engage with enabling our students to have agency, it's really about becoming the guide on the side. Okay. So here's another one. I actually filmed this very recently, maybe a week ago. And so what we did was we created a narrative. I stole some heart rate monitors off the PE department. Soz. Don't worry, I gave I gave all of them back. Everything's fine. And what we did was we were just experimenting. So we were creating a unit, trying to co-create a unit essentially. So myself and my year 7 students, about what is your response to fear stimulus, right? So if we go back to our brain, if you're put in a situation where your amygdala up in here, what we call the guard dog, that is your threat response radar. If that's stimulated and it stimulates your hindbrain, before you know it, your adrenaline goes up, cortisol spews out into your bloodstream, so the human stress hormone, and then your heart rate goes up. So we were going to measure fear response, and let's see what happened. So the measurements there on the bottom left, we had 3 heart rate monitors going, but the one measuring this student was on the bottom left. And she's engaged in she's walking the plank, somewhere 20 stories above a skyline. This is a VR app called Richies Plank Experience. Dr. Charles Sevigny at the University of Melbourne has been using this for the last few years, doing fear responses and helping people overcome fear of heights. They've been doing some phenomenal work there at the physiology department and their virtual reality learning studio there. So we were looking at her heart rate that was going up. She started off around about 70 BPM, and that was about 133, I think it was. But if we look at, okay, that looks very fun and great and wow, how does that relate to the curriculum? Well, it actually relates. It's really easy to relate it to curriculum points. So I've just put in a couple there. So finding percentages and quantities, looking at different dependent and independent variables. So we mix it with experimental design in year 7 science, understanding what variables we're controlling. We can look at creating graphs from this data. And that's actually what we did. One of the students out of shot there had Google Sheets up, and we were looking at the various pre and post data from it. Now, the day before we did this test, but we did it with heart rate monitors. And so we were doing it with, the pressure cuffs, the old blood pressure monitors. So I borrowed those from the science department. And because it took a while, you've got to pump them up, wait for it to get a measure. We're looking at systolic, diastolic, and then the actual thing we really cared about, which was our heart rate. It was just too clunky and it took too long. So we did a bit of a reflection and analyzed that, to get this data, we need to actually find a way to get real time. And then someone said, it's like a Fitbit. Oh my goodness. Oh, I think the PE department's got some. And so, the next day we gave that a test and commented on the differences in our data using different devices to get solid data. So there's so much there, so many things you can unpack from a really fun activity. Okay, so I'll just skip ahead. There's an app I wanted to just briefly mention to you guys called CoSpaces. Some of you might already know it. CoSpaces.io is a great learning tool. There's a teacher who I believe they are over in the States. Apologies, I cannot remember their name off the top of my head, but basically they've created a lesson in math. They're looking at the velocity of vehicles, and they actually did a text to voice audio setup so that students can engage with this. These kind of things have been phenomenal for our online learning that we've done this year when we were in lockdown, of course, down here in Victoria. And so, doing these kind of things, I had students do something very similar to this, and they had to create a COVID-19 molecule and then, comment on its shape and the protein receptors on the outside. And then they had to create an avatar, a version of themselves taking control over that and somehow containing or even destroying that particular molecule. And of course, the rationale behind that in terms of the brain stuff, which is everything, is them feeling some kind of control or empowerment over the whole pandemic situation, which is, of course, by definition, a situation that yields feelings of a lack of control, lack of agency. There's nothing I can do. I feel trapped. So little things like that can be super, super helpful for students. All right. And just briefly, we won't watch this whole thing because I just wanted to touch on how you can use programs like CoSpaces and an AR. It's almost like a QR code cube, and it's called Merge Cube. And there's a lot of neat things you can do with it regarding engaging students. They can gamify their learning. They can create representations of a mathematical concept. And this awesome teacher here, what he did was got them to work on creating units of how they can create surface area calculations and volume calculations. So they created houses, they look at what they were measuring and created visual representations. Doing that kind of work spatially is super important. We know we can do it with cardboard, we can do it with foam, we can do it with egg cartons. There's so many ways that we can do it. And the payoff is huge because it really does help with that conceptual understanding. Now, just a quick word on utilizing that technology, and in particular, when it comes to what I call algorithmic math software. So there's some amazing products out there in very wide use, as we know. And the algorithm, as we know, differentiates according to the results of the student. So it helps keep them in that zone of growth, right? But with any technology, from a hammer to a VR headset to using some kind of online algorithmic math software, it's really about how we use that technology. And given the first one, our job's about three things. You've heard this a million times before: relationships, relationships, relationships. So it's really important we understand that the time we spend knowing our students as people isn't compromised by them engaging with this software. So I think it's super important to be mindful about that. We don't want to lose our relationship with our student. by going, okay, that's cool. Yep, they're off on that, and that student's off on this, and then the whole class is doing it, and off they go. Oh, cool. I'm just going to check emails. I'm just going to be doing this because, you know, I'm a teacher. We've got all these obligations, and I've got to do this and do these reports, and that's a dangerous place to go. And I challenge you to be mindful of that when that happens. It happens to all of us from time to time, but I challenge you to red flag yourself when that sort of situation occurs, and just get up out of that teacher's desk and just walk and sit down next to one of your kids and have a yarn and see where they're at and see what's challenging them and how they're overcoming those challenges. Skill curve punishment. What I mean by that is some students, and I know this personally through my youngest, who is pretty ridiculous at maths. He's a grade 1 and he's doing grade 4, 5 stuff. Proud parent. But humble brag aside, the reality is he has to do a lot more time when he's doing these assessments, because he'll do a test. Congratulations, you nailed it. And now he'll do another one. And now he'll do another one. And now his mates are off doing work in the STEM space, or they're off to another lesson, and he's still doing another one. So just be mindful of when you're using this, whichever algorithmic software your school might be using, be aware what that's setting up is actually a punishment for success, because he's losing time. You know, he's seeing it as, well, I have to do this stuff, and now I don't get to, you know, go and do this that the other guys in the class are doing, or now they've gone to do this and I've missed out. So just be mindful of how much time. Again, it's about how much time students are engaging with this kind of thing, because the software is amazing. There's so many great products out there, as you know, but just be very careful about that it can actually sometimes punish our high achievers. And the cognitive load safety net is what I've already touched on, which is, oh, that's good. The students are engaged in this stuff. Cool, I can just get work done, right? Be very careful about that. Make sure that you're up and moving and interacting and building on that most important thing, which is relationships. All right. Some examples. Let's get a bit mathsy. So if we're going to get hands-on and go out, we can do something like an obstacle avoidance drone. If you're doing trigonometry, you could, if your school's lucky enough to have a little drone that they can use, you can program. That would be really cool. Even better, train your students up, have them fly it. But you go out with the basics. You go out with protractors, and you make DIY clinometers, and you do, right, let's use our skills to, first of all, we're going to guess the height of the tree. And now what we're going to do is we have to make a device to measure the angle and see if we can get a more accurate height. And then finally, you might hover the drone over it and perhaps get the exact height of the tree itself. Now, that's all cool and great, but you want to build a narrative around it. So maybe you could do, we're doing aerial survey work, and we have a drone that's flying. We need to make sure that we know the heights so we can program it in so our drone does not hit that tree and cost us our contract, because we are running this particular business, right? It's the narrative, creating that around the learning is super important. So we've got students here engaging in some good old outdoor math. So we're doing good old fashioned velocity, time, and distance calculations. I really wish personally I understood how to use that formula triangle a lot better when I was at school, because by the time I got to year 10, 11, I was pretty nope with that stuff, despite years down the track when I became a teacher, teaching maths and doing methods in year 10 and going, what? I really wish I had engaged with it in this kind of way. And so there's a lot you can do there, as you can see. I'll just move my, excuse me for a second. I'll just move my camera out of the way just a little bit there. Boopity boop, to the side, and then down there. Oopsie daisy, hang on. There. So as you can see, you can do a lot with calculating velocity over time, switching it around, estimating distance based on a known speed of this vehicle. You can do it with paper aircraft. There are so many things that you can do just by getting outdoors and just by getting hands-on. Again, it's about enabling them to have control. Students can come up with questions like these, for example. These were ones that we did last year from a couple of different groups of students for, like sort of a 3 to 4 week module. Looking at, okay, so we've got an aerial photo there. We can compare that to Google Earth satellite cameras or satellite view, compare it to maybe some aerial shots of our school that we've taken ourselves. How accurately can you calculate distances? And it's like a town planning unit. So you have to show that the measured on the ground, which they do at the end, is as close as possible to the actual calculations that you made from those static images. You could look at how to create a, and this is just a contextual example, using a drone to take multiple photos and engaging in what's called photogrammetry, where you take about 100 photos from one altitude and then 100 from another. You put it in free software called Meshroom, boom, you've got a 3D render of what you took. And the kids pushed even further because agency, and they said, I think we can actually get this exported as an object file, put it into the VR room, and there we are inside a 3D render fully mapped out of that particular area of the school, which again, they incorporated into a town planning unit. Using basics like Lego. And okay, well, let's create a Mars bot. You know, the next nuke-powered Mars rover is going to be landing, I think, February, March next year. It's on the way. It's in the cruise, as NASA tells me at the moment. And so based on what's going on and the incredible scientific sort of push out to the planets, students can engage with these kind of tasks where they designed and 3D printed a drill device to mine through the ice and extract water from the North Pole. There's so many cool things you can do. And this is what it looked like. So like the rover that's going up, there'll be a little aerial unit as well. This is a culmination of about 5 weeks of work. Now, yes, the more astute of you will know that that screw had been programmed to go the wrong way from the motor. So I do apologize for that. You have to change the polarity to get it drilling down into the ice. But what a cool unit. I was so surprised and so just amazed. These guys were coming in, again, lunchtimes to do that extra work. So to be flexible enough and to be able to enable our students to have agency, to have that, I guess, ability to run with the ball, knowing that we're there to support them. It's all about letting go to let grow, right? It's all about ultimately knowing yourself. And you've heard this quote before, that students produce better outcomes working with teachers they like and respect, okay? And of course, the answer, as most of us know, when the question is, so how do you get students to like and respect you then? Obviously, like and respect them first. But here's the kicker. There's another point I always like to add. You actually have to take it to the next level and like and respect yourself as a person on a fully scars and stars based perspective. You have to be comfortable enough in your own skin to be vulnerable with your students, to be open with your students, and to have the capacity, you know, to really be there for your students and support them to grow. So we've got the amazing Rita Pearson, who you've probably seen the TED Talk of. If you haven't, I fully recommend it. It is about sharing of yourself. It's really about that you do you, right? So it's about, I share with my kids every time I meet a new class. I always share with them about my wife, Sian, and about our boys, Oscar and Fletcher, and what they're into and what we're into, and how I'm a massive Star Wars geek, and yay, the Mandalorian, and all sorts of stuff like that. And then I engage with the students, and over those intervening weeks, get to know them. They get to know my boundaries, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And before you know it, we're quite a connected team. And I know most of us do this, but it's always important to, I think, share of yourself. You don't have to share your family history with them. But the more you share, mirror neurons kick in, the more they're going to share. And before you know it, they are respecting you more. They're feeling more connected to you. And before you know it, boom, 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 boom. They're going for it more. They're producing better outcomes. Now, there's an unpublished study, and some of the early data from this RMIT study showed that empathic listening was a contributing factor to student-teacher relationships. And the result was they were likely to become more motivated in their learning. That is to do with agency, right? They're becoming more, oh, okay, let's go. They're away. they're making change within their situation. They're pushing forwards. So it's quite interesting there that some of those factors there are really easy to do. Empathic or reflective listening, I'll give you some examples. You could see someone come in and maybe they're looking a bit tired. Just walk over to them once you've done your brief instruction phase and they're starting to work on their projects or work through what it is they're doing in your class. Cruise over and say, hey, are you all right, Stacey? I just noticed you look really tired today. Oh, yeah, well, so-and-so. And maybe they open up a little bit. And then you go, oh, gosh, that must have been really hard for you. Well, I just wanted you to know that I'm glad you're here today. I can see you doing it tough, but, you've got this and I've got you. And that little brief thing, what did that take? 10 seconds? You'll be amazed the result of doing that kind of connection work with your students. So, as I touched on before, flaunt your failures, right? Fail fabulously, make all of the mistakes and make them visible. It is crucial that we wear our mistakes on our sleeves, right? Because that means, if they make mistakes, maybe I can too. You are modeling that. Remember, the core of learning comes from your ability to make mistakes. In fact, a new script I've been rocking with my kids lately, and it yields some weird facial expressions. They're like, huh? The only reason I'm standing here as your teacher is because I have failed so much more than you. I have done all of the failures to get here. So it's really important that we're brave enough to fail. And hopefully in terms of their own skills and confidence, they get to a point in an environment that you foster as a teacher where they can fail publicly. They can handle making mistakes in front of their students, in front of their fellow students. That's key. All right. Whoop. So where are we? There we are. Basically, when we look at praise versus encouragement, I just want to briefly touch on this. Praise is a habit that I was in for so many years. So praise is basically, oh, great work, gold stamp, woo! And we look at the actual efficacy of that. Well, what you've done is if you've fed the dopamine monster, so you've essentially fed a bit of feedback, and that highlights and reinforces extrinsic feedback, extrinsic motivation in the student. I want this because I need an A. I need this because I need 90%, right? I need a gold star. That, and studies have indicated that kind of thinking long term is actually not the best. And it's kind of the antithesis of enabling your students to have more agency and growing that in themselves. Yes, in short-term thinking, that's great. It might be a quick test, or it could be you're in athletics on a Saturday and you're doing a 100-meter sprint and you want to get a PB, right? I get it. But intrinsic motivation is really the key. So changing up your scripts a little bit to, I notice you work hard. You must feel really proud of yourself. I appreciate your sportsmanship. Wow, the amount of work that you put in, that was amazing. You worked so consistently. You should feel really proud about that. And scripts like that are absolutely gold when it comes to helping enable our students to have more agency, because it's about the intrinsic motivation. Self-drive is key, right? There's no entrepreneur out there or no change maker in any system that doesn't have a high level of intrinsic motivation, right? As opposed to extrinsic. So Q squared, answer questions with questions. Neat little technique there. Infuriating for students when they first hear it, particularly if they're not used to it. But answering questions with questions. I'm not sure. How could you spell that? Could you stretch and blend it for me? Or, and this is a good one I learned as a relief teacher doing CRT work a few years ago, which is, let's have a look at, sir, how do I do this? Oh, that's a great question. How could you do that? Well, I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. You're supposed to be the teacher. Yep, granted. Get that. Totally on board. However, have you tried going back a couple of steps and then showing me where it went pear-shaped? Oh, okay. I'll get it. Oh, okay. I forgot to do this, and then I didn't carry that. Oh, okay. Well, thanks, Mr. V. I did nothing except be there for them and suggest a little problem-solving algorithm that if you do that consistently, will help them engage it themselves and go for it themselves. So important. So, other techniques. Ask 3 before me. And you've probably heard this before, and it's a nice little script. And you say, well, have you asked 3 people before me? And then challenge them on it, because sometimes they'll say yes and they might not have actually done it. It's very important you get into that culture of making them collaborate with their peers, making them, really encouraging them to collaborate with their peers and problem solve. Here's an interesting one that works pretty well as well, which is help desk time. And so maybe out of a double lesson, if you've got 70, 90 minutes, whatever, then you go, okay, so I will be available at these 4 times throughout our double lesson. I will be at the help desk. In between times, remember to ask 3 before me. And then if you're still stuck, write the question down, and yourself, or if they're doing project-based learning, your team leader or communications expert can come along to the help desk and ask me for help with that particular thing. And often you'll find as you circulate the room that the students who have written down the things they're stuck on, because a lot of them have these habits of learned helplessness, because we've always been the, can I help you? Sort of person, they've crossed them out. Or later on you walk around and say, oh, I see you've got that, but you didn't come to the help desk. Oh, yeah, no, we sorted that one out. Yes, yes. So good. They're beginning to believe. All right. And that's when you actually help them, by allowing them to help themselves. Okay, so here's a really important one. Behavior is a symptom. Always. What you see, oh, so-and-so is just being such a beep, to be corrected to so-and-so is choosing this behavior, to be corrected even further to so-and-so is dysregulated, not feeling safe, and acting out as a result of it. Because remember, just like us, these kids come into the class every day with who knows what in their backpacks in terms of what they're dealing with in their lives. So behavior is always a symptom of what's going on in their brain and in their nervous system around them. So here's a bit of advice. Never help a student expressing that all of it is the issue or everything. Oh, what's wrong? What's up? What are you stuck on? Everything. Okay, no worries. So I can see you getting a bit stressed about that. This is the regulation strategy, right? You're becoming the co-regulator. So I can see that you're a bit frustrated about this. Well, yeah, I am. It sucks. I don't even know where to start. And, they might externalize and say, well, you didn't, blah, blah, blah. Don't take it personally. Leave your ego at the door. Okay. You're there to help them. And so you can just go, oh, I can see that that's really frustrating for you. Engage the earlier script. Have you tried going back a couple of steps? Oh, I don't know where to go with it. Okay, well, and then give them space. Give them that take up time. Back off and go, okay, no worries. Come back to me or just give me a yell and I'll come straight back and help you out. Once you can tell me the first part of what's frustrating you. And once you've got it, I've got you 100%. Okay. And then away you go. And you're teaching them that sequencing of problem solving, and you're actually calming them down first. You're validating what they're feeling, saying, I can see you're really frustrated right now. And then away you go. Very, very important sequence. Okay. So to finish off on a couple of things, this is my dad back in NZ. He flies for Air New Zealand. And he always kicks the tires before he lights the fires. What does that mean, Tony? He always prepares and does a pre-flight check before he begins. Now, I was thinking about it a few years back and went, I wonder if I could do like a pre-flight check for class, like a pre-teaching check. And so, given the language we all speak, let's do it with an acronym. And so, with PrEP, we've got personal. We check in with our senses. What am I feeling? Do I feel a bit anxious? Have I got weird butterflies in my tummy? Are my shoulders tense? Is my scalp tingling? Do I just feel a bit off today? Or am I good? Do I feel okay and I've got myself? Resources. So I'm good to go. I've got my lesson plan. Everything's happening. Your environment, sound, light, desks, workbenches, storage, good to go. And finally, just take 3 little breaths. And by little, I mean deep. And so you can just go, so that everything you've got in your backpack is left at the door, so that you are present and you're calm, or you're excited, or you're however you are as a person. You do you as a teacher, and so that you are there for your students and you're ready to go and ready to be the best you possibly can be for your kids. Well, agents, we come to the end of our session. thank you for joining me on this session this morning. I hope that you picked up some hints and tips. And to answer this question, Tony, why the guitar, man? It's because it's about playing to your strengths. If you're a musician, if you're a cartographer, if you're a mad photographer, whatever it is that you bring as a person to the table in your teaching, do that. Build your skill set around your passions, and your creativity and confidence will go. And you will just become such an amazing educator and able to facilitate that agency and growth in your students. Thank you, team. Mr. Moore, do we have any questions?
Thank you, Tony. Wow. You mentioned throughout that presentation, get the wow factor. And I tell you what, watching you speak in this presentation today, it was full of wow factor. There was so much to take away from it. I'm like, my head has exploded. Where do I even start? I guess I've got a couple of questions. And if anyone else has questions, feel free to put them in into the chat or into the question. First question, actually, we do have one from Karen. It's rather a statement. It says, very interesting. Holistic approach is essential. I assume like that was one of the messages you wanted to get through today.
Yeah. And
that's one of the questions that I've got around that as well is how do you see, because you talk about it in a holistic approach with what you do. How do you see this working, particularly in a maths class? Because that's how maths classes operate a lot these days. We've got our walls. We are doing maths in this time. How do you do this in a regular maths class?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. And I kind of touched on it too. Like, it can come across as nice one, Captain Idealism. And there's nothing worse than hearing something from somebody and going, oh man, how can I do that? And it's not really about trying to shoehorn in all these, wow, look at these technologies and these activities and look at these amazing things. It's really about trying what works for you and starting small. This is 2020, man. We're going to set the bar low, real low. So it's really, about going, okay, well, how can I let my students take a bit more control over what's going on? Are we doing a unit? Or maybe I'm doing something to do with surface area and volume to do with, my particular primary school class that you're working with. Well, let's have a look, guys. Is anybody building a house at the moment? Or have a look. Look, the renovations over there. Oh, that's the new train station being built. Let's have a look. And what does that look like? We'll take some photos of it. We'll have a look at, some of the building elements of it. And let's make our own. Let's use blocks, or let's use Play-Doh. And you can use Play-Doh and water to do volume using Archimedes' principle, right? You can do so many different things to take a practical, I guess, perspective on what their mathematical learning happens to be. You don't have to do it all the time, but even something as simple as the same stuff, do it outside. Let's go work under the tree today. I think we get stuck in our cycles. Humans are creatures of habit, and even on a gorgeous day, you could have a school with amazing grounds. Where are the classes working outside? The Wi-Fi still works there if you're doing online stuff. Why are you not outside? There's so many little simple things you can do to change it up for your kids. Yeah.
Thank you, Tony. And there was another question we've just got from Damien Howson as well, where it says, we're taking this on this year. Our main concern is how do we make sure students still have the essential knowledge for VCE? Can you suggest strategies for this?
Oh, Damo, great call. It's a hard one, isn't it? Because when it comes to this kind of learning, I'm calling it primary school teachers do it better, but they do it better because of the systems. They are the dedicated teacher for the year with those students. They can be a bit more agile, and they are the human Swiss Army knives. Huge shout out to our primary school teacher friends, because they are integrating these different learning areas the whole time. It is much more difficult in the siloed approach in secondary school. And as we move to VCE, we might have a lot of cross KLA units, project-based learning, do really cool stuff. We still hit that Bloom's taxonomy knowledge-based bottleneck regurgitation tron of the VCE assessment protocols as they are. So yeah, it is really hard. I think it's really It's about looking at it and going, yes, we do backwards by design planning and go, let's look at what we need to do in VCE in terms of our key learnings, our key knowledge. Okay, now what skills do we need in our kids so that they can be stronger when they get there? And if you're building those skills of self-efficacy, research, collaboration, it will pay off down the track. The knowledge stuff they can pick up really quickly. We know this from data of students having not touched a subject before and diving into a 3-4 unit and crushing it. If they have self-efficacy and a supported environment and they've done a lot of that skill building, they can jump into 3-4 and do really, really well. So yeah, it's essentially, it's about doing that. And it's a challenge. I completely agree.
Perfect. Thank you. And I've got one more question, then I'll give you a quick little opportunity to just give yourself, share your details so that people can actually know where to contact you, because I've got a couple of questions around that. But my last question for you to just quickly get through, I guess, if you can, is creativity. What about the teachers who go, look, that's so creative, I can't come up with that. What do you think about that?
Outsource, and then outsource some more. So what you need to do is outsource to your greatest resource, which are your students. They are epically creative. Humans have evolved to be born extremely creative. And if you've looked at anything from Ken Robinson, rest in peace, you will see that gets bred out of us a little bit as we go into adult life. So when it comes to, I'm stuck on this, sit down with some students who are keen beans, give them the chance, send out the Google Forms, engage them with what was great about this unit, what really sucked about it. You don't have to use that terminology, but what didn't you like about it? And then start to build it together. And when they see that they can have their DNA on part of the learning, that's huge in terms of their agency, their confidence, their skills. That's going to go next level. So engage with them.
Perfect. Thank you. Last question is, because we've got a couple of people who want to get in touch about their top fives and also get in touch with you about through your Building Better Brains. Is there one place that you can send people to so they can get in touch with you and then ask more questions beyond today?
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks, Tom. You guys can still see the screen share all right? I'm just on. Can you guys see that? I guess the question is, Tom, can they see this final slide I've got here?
Let me have a look. It's just there's a lag at the moment, so now they can.
All good. So basically, the final slide I've got here is about our website, buildingbetterbrains.com.au. You can engage with myself and my wonderful wife, Sian. We do a lot of consultancy with primary and secondary schools. We also do a lot of work with mental health professionals. And we have a Trauma Smart Schools program and connection before correction-based strategies. There's a lot of really cool stuff that we've got, both on demand and in person. So please check that out. If you can see my screen there, there's an awesome face. In fact, I can see them. Two of it in mine. I've got the wonderful Tom Moore times two. I run a podcast called EduBabble, which is all about real talk from real teachers in education. And there's an awesome episode I love to death, fully biased, but it's our boy Tom Moore and talking about the beauty of math. And he really enlightened me with his perspective on it, completely changed how I thought about mathematics in learning. So there's a link to the episode there. And of course, we've got a Facebook group for parents and educators, and there is a ton of resources you can use for your classrooms there. So please jump on in.
Thank you so much, Tony, for a fantastic presentation today. I really, really enjoyed it. I always get so much from listening to you speak and from interacting with you. You're just such a passionate educator. So thank you very much for your time today. We will now take a quick break. Don't forget to check out the virtual delegate satchel to touch base with our sponsors and exhibitors as well. The next session will commence at 10:25. Thanks again, Tony, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Tom.